Tonight on Talking Points, a whistleblower leaks President Trump's alleged effort to get Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. Could it broaden House Democrats' effort to impeach the president?
And today, climate change was the focus at the United Nations General Assembly. Millions around the world and right here in Syracuse have protested for climate change action from their governments. Our Sabrina Majore is in studio.
And the attacks on Saudi oil fields, contradicting stories from U.S. and Saudi Arabia and Houthi rebels in Yemen. What each side is saying and what it could mean. Talking Points starts right now. President Donald Trump is facing intense scrutiny for allegedly pressuring Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. Good evening. I'm Jack Watson.
And I'm Conor Wight. A whistleblower complained about a conversation between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The DOJ and the White House are withholding the specifics of the complaint from Congress, and Trump has admitted that he spoke with the Ukrainian leader and that Joe Biden came up. Reports suggest that Trump may have threatened to block military aid if Ukraine didn't investigate possible corruption involving Joe Biden's son.
Talking Points analyst Brandon Ross joins us in studio now. Brandon, welcome. So what did the president allegedly want Joe Biden and his family investigated for?
So back in 2014, while Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States, he was working with Ukraine to help their flailing democratic government, particularly in the response to Russia annexing Crimea. In that same time period, Hunter Biden was on the board of a Ukrainian gas company. Now, governments and most experts agree that there was no wrongdoing involved in this. However, Trump believes that there was some sort of corruption involved, some sort of arrangement, and he wants that investigated by Ukraine.
Now, we heard Trump later this week that he did admit that there was a phone call that took place. He's just not disclosing specifically what was said on either end of the call. What else do we know about what they spoke about?
So we do know that corruption was discussed, and we do know that Joe Biden and his son Hunter were brought up some point during the discussion. Now, what there is some speculation about, because around the time of this phone call, it was mentioned by Trump that he was considering withholding $250 million in military aid from Kiev. So the question is now, was that sort of a quid pro quo offer? Because that would be very controversial if it was done, and that could lead down the impeachment route. But we do not know anything about a quid pro quo at this time. All we know is that there was corruption discussed and that Joe Biden was a focus.
Brandon, you mentioned the impeachment discussion. What implication do you think this has in terms of that discussion?
Well, there was already some swell up in the Democratic caucus in favor of impeachment, and this is pushing some further closer to the edge. Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has now said that he thinks impeachment might be the only way forward at this point.
Now, Brandon, very quickly, what else is there to keep an eye on moving forward?
Well, Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph McGuire is set to testify before Congress on Thursday, and he's the one who has made the decision to withhold this whistleblower complaint from Congress, so it should be really interesting
Brandon,
to watch.
We'll have more information on that later in the show. Thank you so much. Earlier today, the UN convened for its Climate Action Summit. Among the many speakers at the meeting was 16-year-old Swedish teen Greta Thunberg. Thunberg scorned leaders for their inaction and led hundreds of youth in strikes on Friday to demand action on climate change now. Our Sabrina Majore is in studio with more. Sabrina?
Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
That's right, guys. 16-year-old Swedish activist Greta Thunberg has become an increasing figurehead for climate change since she began skipping school weekly and protesting outside of her government's parliament last year. Her movement, known as Fridays for the Future, strikes every Friday to demand action from governments and the international community. This week's strike was by far the largest yet. An estimated 4 million people across the globe participated to demand that their government climate change. Here in Syracuse, hundreds of students gathered in Foreman Park to urge government leaders to implement concrete plans and invest in renewable energy. The Syracuse strike saw State Senator Rachel May and Democratic challenger for New York 24, Dana Falter, join in solidarity with protesters at the rally. May touted her record for pushing for climate action in New York State. She was a key figure in passing New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which will go into effect in January. The act commits the state to investing in clean energy for disadvantaged communities and creates regulations to limit carbon emissions statewide.
Our goal was to create a bill that would become a model for other states and that would send a very clear message to industry that we mean business in New York.
So, Sabrina, we know that Antonio Gutierrez, he wanted people to come to this summit, not with just, anything up in the air, but with actual concrete plans. Did he get what he asked for?
Yeah, so he did actually get some proposals. So Prime Minister Angela Merkel came in pledging to increase climate protection funding. Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand said that she was going to invest in regulations and sort of crack down on the farming industry so that they can get to sustainable farming there. And then Prime Minister Modi of India pledged to increase renewable energy capacities as well.
Now, Sabrina, we know who was there, but which countries decided to skip the meeting?
So Brazil and Saudi Arabia both were not present, obviously because both of them have interest in fossil fuel interest. Also not talking at that summit was Japan, South Africa, and Australia, and the US as well. President Trump actually wasn't supposed to be at the summit, but he made a surprise visit. Stopped by for about 15 minutes. He was supposed to go to a conference on freedom of religion.
Now, you mentioned President Trump was there. What is the general U.S. stance on this issue?
So after the meeting today, Trump told reporters that, he does believe in countries pushing for clean air and clean water, but independently, which is sort of in line with what he did with the Paris Climate Accord. So he wants action, but independently. At the same time, you see his administration rolling back EPA protections, like the Clean Water Act that Obama put in. So he's sort of, very on the fence with implementing any concrete action that, again, would go against his base.
All right, Sabrina Majori in studio. Lots of climate news in the news this week. Sabrina, thank you very much. In June, New York State passed a law aimed at capping rent. It's called the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. The act passed the Democratic-controlled New York legislature. It was hailed as a win for tenants and activists across the state, but now New York landlords, including those here in Syracuse, want to change parts of the law. Talking Points guest contributor Jishnu Nair is in studio to break down the act for us.
Eviction protections for tenants that make it illegal for landlords to remove them for up to 4 weeks. If a tenant is evicted for breaking the terms of their lease, then eviction court must allow them 30 days to resolve their issues. Landlords can also be charged with illegal evictions if a tenant contacts them about property issues within a year of the eviction, and they cannot raise rent prices as a retaliation for tenant complaints. Many landlords are taking issues with the Act's clauses that deal with rent pricing. The Act says that all rental units have new limits on security deposits. Landlords cannot use tenant blacklists anymore and will be required to provide up to 90 days notice when instituting a rent increase of more than 5%. Landlords also must give 14 days notice for rent payments as opposed to the usual 3 days. Landlords have been saying that these changes hurt their ability to maintain their properties and make a profit. Before the bill was drafted, lawmakers visited several New York cities, including Syracuse, to gather input from landlords and tenants. Pamela Hunter, who represents Onondaga County in the Assembly, voted yes on the floor. Hunter said in June that the legislation gives tenants permanent protections that ensure they're not at the mercy of corrupt practices. According to Hunter, about 7,000 tenants are brought to eviction court in Syracuse annually, and about 5,000 are evicted. Back to you guys.
Coming up on Talking Points, the state of California is suing the Trump administration. The environmental regulation California wants upheld, that and more on the other side of the break. Don't go away.
Patriotism. It inspires passionate debate. It's worn like a badge of honor with good reason, because it means love and devotion for one's country. But what really makes up this country of ours? It's the people. To love America is to love all Americans. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love. Love beyond age, sexuality, disability, race, religion, and other labels. Because love has no labels.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Go, bro. Okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. We're getting so wet.
The battle over climate change regulations between the Trump administration and California continues. Talking Points analyst Peyton May says the recent national lawsuit could leave major repercussions on the auto industry. Peyton?
California and 22 other states filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for revoking waivers California has historically used to set its own auto emission standards. The Clean Air Act of 1970 gave California the chance to apply for waivers in order to lessen the levels of soot and smog that the state uniquely suffers from. Tensions started when the Department of Justice launched an investigation into a deal California made with 4 top auto companies: Ford, Volkswagen, Honda, and BMW. The companies said that they would follow regulations from the Obama administration and produce cars that are more environmentally friendly by 2026. The National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration says that states are not allowed to set their own fuel economy standards. The states are countering, saying that the Clean Air Act gave waivers before, and revoking those waivers would be unlawful. Lawsuits between California and the current administration have been quite common, the most recent being the 60th suit filed by California's Attorney General Javier Becerra.
Now, Peyton, obviously this has wide-reaching implications, both legally and in terms of business in the United States. So who exactly will this impact?
So we could expect this impacting the future of the auto industry, along with states' ability to create their own environmental laws, and even the amount of carbon pollution emitted by the United States. Now, California's been setting their own standards since 1959, so this isn't something new, but obviously it came up again once that deal was made with those 4 auto companies. This time, there's 13 states that actually have the same standards as California, which totaled to about 1/3 of auto sales in the past year.
So a lot of legal questions up in the air. What do you think is going to be an outcome of this lawsuit?
Well, I think it's going to have to make it all the way up to the Supreme Court for the issue to be settled. Obviously, with all the climate change protests and everything happening in the news right now, this is a huge issue, and they have so many states backing them that I don't know what the Trump administration is going to have to do about this.
All right, our Peyton May in studio. Peyton, thank you very much. Last week, missiles and drone strikes targeted oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. The attack was the largest ever on the kingdom's oil facilities and will temporarily cut Saudi oil production in half. Iran-supported Houthi rebels in Yemen took credit for the attacks, but there has been no absolute confirmation of the source of the attack. Last week, President Trump said that so far, all signs point to Iranian involvement.
Well, it's looking that way. We'll have some pretty good, we're having some very strong studies done, but it's certainly looking that way at this moment, and we'll let you know. Do I want war? I don't want war with anybody. I'm somebody that would like not to have war.
President Trump there, how has the U.S. exactly responded to this chain of events?
So the immediate response is that there will be a deployment sent to Saudi Arabia of U.S. troops. Now, this is going to be a primarily defensive deployment, so that does not mean that some kind of war is coming. The mission of the troops is going to be to make sure that the facilities are being defended, but the majority of the deployment is going to be more related to missile defense to make sure that the Saudis can defend those facilities. Now, what happens other than that? President Trump has not really come out to condemn Iran so far. Mike Pompeo has. Look for the United States to kind of try to defend Saudi Arabia without going as far as to attack Iran or to publicly condemn Iran.
Now, Michael, there's a lot of questions right now about who exactly was responsible for the attack. What do we know about it right now?
Right now, we know very little. What we do know is we do know a little bit about what the missiles were and how they were used, and we don't know how they were obtained. The missiles in question here are Iranian in nature. The question is this: that does not necessarily point to Iran's involvement in terms of actively selling them, because they could have been acquired on the black market. Now, the other thing that's been pointed to with these missiles is this particular model of missile has a range of 700 kilometers. And what that means is they could not have been fired inside of Yemen borders, according to what the experts are saying.
Now, it sounds like either way, this is either coming from Iran or Iranian-backed forces. So what has this done to affect Saudi Arabian and Iranian relations?
It spells trouble. The two countries have been kind of watching over a proxy war in Yemen, supporting Sunni and Shia sides respectively that match along with their ideologies. This seems like it could be grounds for an escalation. The Saudis have not come out and said directly that they're going to be retaliating, but we're in the stages where this could be a possibility.
And Michael, what do you see as an outcome of this in the next couple of weeks?
Economically speaking, watch India and Turkey. Those are the two countries that get the majority of their oil, upwards of 80%, from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabian production's been halved. This week at the UN General Assembly, Saudi Arabia said they may be presenting evidence as to who the attack was perpetrated by.
All right, our analyst Michael Furnari in studio. Michael, thank you very much. Israeli elections are at a standstill, with both sides unable to get a decisive election victory. Israel's current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is neck and neck with challenger Benny Gantz. Joining us is Rob Flax with details on just how close the votes are.
So the second Israeli election since April of this year has again left Bibi Netanyahu struggling to build his coalition government. An Israeli prime minister needs to have a secure 61-seat majority to be able to form a governing coalition. Now, Netanyahu is currently at 55 seats with support from his own Likud party as well as the ultra-Orthodox parties. However, his opponent, Benny Gantz, stands with just 54 votes and support from both the Labour and Democratic parties. Now, the numbers are actually still in flux, as Gantz earlier appeared to receive an endorsement from the Arab Party Alliance, only to have those 3 votes withdrawn at the last moment. Now, both men are meeting with the president to determine who will be the first prime minister, and at the moment, the rotation of power seems to be stalled, as understandably both of the men want to be first.
All right, Rob, are these two candidates kind of stuck at the outcome? What can be done, I guess, to sort of move the needle here?
Well, there is one man in Israel, arguably the most powerful, Lieberman. Now, he has an 8-vote caucus. Now, he actually has not stepped in just yet, but he's actually not quite a big fan of either of the candidates. He's not a fan of Netanyahu. He doesn't like the religious zealotry, the far-right tactics. He's not a fan. He's not even meeting with them. Now, Gantz, it's a bit of a different story. They actually have sat down and talked, but he actually doesn't like that the Arab Party was supporting him, although this complicates things as, understandably, those actual votes didn't make it to him. However, they're at least in conversation. So, at the moment, he has the ability to decide the election, but at this moment is choosing not to.
Our Rob Flax in studio right now. Rob, thank you very much. Coming up, the ongoing legal battle between President Trump and New York prosecutors over tax returns. What it could mean as the 2020 election cycle rages on. Stay tuned to Talking Points.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Wait, why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where do cats go on vacation? New York.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued several public apologies last week after photos surfaced of the Prime Minister dressed in a Halloween party costume. One of the photos shows Trudeau in what's being called brownface, as he appears to have painted his skin brown at an Arabian Nights themed party.
The photos were obtained by the media just over a month before the planned Canadian parliamentary elections, where the Liberal Trudeau could be ousted by Conservative Andrew Scheer. Now here's Justin Trudeau on what he had to say this week.
Recognize that I let a lot of people down with that choice, and I stand here today to reflect on that and to ask for forgiveness.
Right there, Conor. You can imagine the political ramifications of this with the election just on the horizon here, and not too far in the rearview mirror is the SNC-Lavalin affair.
Exactly, yeah, that obviously did some damage, but I think that what we're seeing in the polls is that we now have 3 photos of either in brownface or blackface, and we've seen polls where that has truly hurt the Liberals in the upcoming election.
So this past scandal makes it worse, a bad situation a little bit worse. Last month, New York prosecutors subpoenaed 8 years of President Trump's tax returns. Now the president is suing to stop that from happening.
Trump's legal team is arguing that the subpoena is unconstitutional because a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. The president is asking a federal judge to block the subpoena until he is out of office. According to Trump, the subpoena is politically motivated and is designed to negatively impact re-election efforts.
New York District Attorney Cy Vance is the one that filed the subpoena. He's looking for Trump's accounting firm Mazars USA to provide tax returns and other financial statements. According to reports, this is part of a criminal investigation. Vance is looking into whether or not President Trump paid adult film actress Stormy Daniels for her silence on an alleged affair between herself and Trump.
The subpoena is currently on hold. Oral arguments begin in federal court on Wednesday. Now, Jack, they do take into account the fact that once he is out of office, then, he's really fair game. This all sort of goes back to precedent that was set by the DOJ in the 70s when Nixon was being investigated. They agreed that indicting a president before any sort of impeachment proceedings happened would hurt his ability to carry out the duties of the executive office and could even threaten the separation of checks and balances.
Right, Conor. That's a precedent that Robert Mueller, you'll recall, upheld in his recent investigation into the president's conduct during the 2016 presidential election. Now, if President Trump were to leave office in 2021, like you said, he could be fair game. Southern District of New York, Manhattan District Attorney, anything can happen.
Exactly. We'll have to see how this all shakes out. Now, the other interesting thing is that, and this is something that the Trump legal team also points out, is that when this goes to court on Wednesday and potentially goes to even higher levels of the court system, it will be the first time that they have actually directly looked at the question, can a sitting president be indicted? The Supreme Court has never looked at it, and it's not something that any sort of federal court has come to any legal decision on.
Of course, it didn't come up when President Richard Nixon was on the verge of being impeached, but then resigned from office back in the early 1970s, Conor.
Indeed, and if we look back to the Constitution, there also isn't any constitutional precedent for that either. It's not something that the founders included. But what we have to, there's the two sides of this coin are that some people argue that the reason why this language wasn't specifically put into the Constitution was to allow it to happen. Now, of course, the founders also could have put in that, they could, as opposed to couldn't, indict a sitting president. But people who are supporting the idea that he can, they're saying that it should be left up to interpretation.
So we really are entering uncharted waters, Conor.
Indeed. Coming up on Talking Points, the Acting Director of National Intelligence, Joseph McGuire, will testify in front of the House Intelligence Committee. We'll be looking ahead to the hearing with critical implications for the Trump presidency. Stay tuned.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees.
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you. They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Looking ahead to later this week, Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph Maguire is scheduled to testify before Congress on Thursday. House members are expected to pepper him with questions about the whistleblower complaint allegedly pertaining to President Trump. Reports indicate it involves Trump asking Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden's son for involvement in corruption.
House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff requested that Maguire send the complaint to Congress. However, he denied that request. Schiff has even gone so far as to say he might sue or even withhold funding from Maguire's office to force his hand.
Impeachment talks have ramped up within the Democratic caucus in light of the controversy. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has so far been reluctant to push for Trump's impeachment. If Maguire's testimony further fuels the fire building in the House, it could strengthen calls for impeachment. If the testimony is a non-event, we'll have to wait even longer to see what will come of this latest White House controversy. And now we bring Brandon Ross back in studio. Brandon, your thoughts?
Well, looking ahead to this testimony on Thursday, I think a lot of people are going to be looking for what exactly Maguire would be willing to answer. Everyone wants the transcript on that committee. That's the biggest thing that Congress wants going forward. They want exactly what happened in that phone call. They want the exact details because there's the allegation out there right now that there was a quid pro quo offer, investigate Joe Biden's son Hunter, and then you get your military aid. If he did that, that would be very problematic, and I think Democrats would really be willing to jump forward on impeachment. Now, that's not going to come out in the testimony, so I think what they're going to try to do is try to get as much of the contents of that conversation as possible, but it seems likely that Joseph Maguire is not necessarily going to be that forthcoming. We've seen this from other agency heads in similar situations. They tend to be very tight-lipped.
Right, and we did hear today that Trump said that he didn't do the alleged quid pro quo that you've been referring to, but that if he did, it would be okay. Now, we'd have to see whether or not that would actually pan out the way that the president believes it would. However, I think that there's a lot that could come out from, although, as you mentioned, Maguire may not be that forthcoming, I think that certain kinds of questions might be able to get him to open up. Do you have a general sense of what lawmakers might be preparing themselves to ask him?
I think they're going to try to ask, just kind of skirt around the heart of the conversation and try to get to the outside edges to try to work their way in. Sort of maybe just asking, like, what was the context of the call? What sparked the calls? Things like that. If they can try to get even tiny tidbits of little information, they can try to build their case. And it's worth noting that, yeah.
Brandon, we'll have to see what happens. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for Talking Points tonight. For more episodes, webisodes, and more, head to CitrusTV.com. Tune in next week. I'm Conor Wight.
And I'm Jack Watson. Have a great night, Syracuse.